Hello again, BookTube. I know it's been a while since I've made a video, but I haven't really felt inclined to make any videos. I've been doing a decent amount of reading, but I haven't really talked about, or I felt the need to talk about it a whole lot. And maybe I'll make a video updating you what I've been reading. But I figured that to get back into making videos, I recently went to the city and bought a ton of used books, so I thought that would be a perfect way to just make a video and talk about some books that I bought and why I bought them. And so this book haul is largely history, so if that doesn't interest you, then you can turn off this video since it'll probably be 40 minutes long. And largely history and some literature, which is quite usual for when I go used book shopping, but this history is, I found a vein of niche history books on a subject that I really enjoy, so I'll share those with you. This might have to be put into 2 videos if it gets too long, but we'll see. I'm going to start off with a stack over here. The first book that I got here is Shakespeare, A Very Short Introduction. It's by Germaine Greer. And I don't mind these very short introduction books. They all have the same design, they just have different color codings to them. And usually they're just exactly what they say they are. They're very short introductions, like this one's 140 pages, to their subject. And then they include a bibliography in the back about, or just a further reading section where if you want to dive deeper into the subject, you can read some of those books. And I really like to collect these when I can get them for cheap. And I got this one for really cheap, and I picked it up. And what I liked about this book, about Shakespeare, is that it doesn't just give you 140 pages of his life and maybe the controversy surrounding whether or not Shakespeare actually wrote the plays. It goes actually into, it's based off of, 6 chapters here, and it goes off of, and only the very first chapter is based off of his life, and then they have the second chapter on poetics, ethics, politics, teleology, and sociology. So it's basically a look at Shakespeare's ideas that are explored within his plays, and I really like that approach. Otherwise, if it was just 140 pages on Shakespeare's life and controversy, authorship controversy, I don't think I would have picked it up. But that was a good find. I have a few more of these on other subjects as well. The next book on my list, on my stack here, is The Storytelling Animal, How Stories Make Us Human, and it's by Jonathan Gottschall. I've never actually heard of this book before, but this kind of book is exactly the kind of book that I really enjoy, or that I really like to collect as well. And just the whole idea of storytelling and why stories and the idea of narrative really draws onto us as humans, whether or not we like to read. Here, we like to, on BookTube, we like to read a lot, and that's very unusual compared to most of the other real world, and so the world likes to consume its stories in different ways, whether that's through television or podcasts is another popular one now, and maybe video games. But this book here, I've never heard of this author or this book before, but a book on storytelling. It's relatively short. I think it's around 200 pages. It's right up my alley in a type of book that I like to read. Just analyzing why stories are so compelling. I did read the introduction to this too, and it's very, like, this guy's a good writer, an entertaining writer, as he should be. And it sounds like he wants to take, drawing on the latest research in neuroscience, psychology, and evolutionary biology. Even though this is written by an English professor. But So, and sounds like he's a good writer based off of the sample that I've read. So I hope it'll be a good reflection on storytelling and why we like to read. And I like these books too because it helps me articulate maybe why I am so compelled by storytelling, and maybe it would help me share that with others in a way that's more than just me saying I've been reading my whole life and I can't really explain why it's so compelling to me and why I find it so captivating. So there's that one. This next book was probably one of my favorite finds, or one of the best finds, based off of books on my wish list, because I got a number of the books that I found used were actually books on my wish list that I've had just sitting on there for a while, and I've never bought them because buying them used or buying them brand new is very expensive, and so I always want to get them used when I can. And it's always a chance when you go used book shopping whether or not you're going to actually find a book that you've been directly looking for. But this one was very cheap and also on my wish list. So this one is Behave by Robert, I think it's Robert Sapolsky. And as you can see there's a sticker. I got it for $1. $1 for this virtually brand new copy. There's no, it's floppy. It's got nothing written inside of it. It's got no creases. It's basically a brand new book for $1. And this book is the subtitle is The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst. And this book was strongly recommended by Steve as just a book where you learn so much about human biology and human behavior. And he said that Sapolsky is a very good writer, and usually I wouldn't pick up a book like this unless it directly touched on a subject that I'm interested in, because usually science and biology and whatnot are not my number one go-to subjects, and it takes a bit to actually get me interested in those subjects, but this one I've been looking forward to, and I've been wanting to buy for a while, and it's quite thick. It's, what is it? It's over 700 pages. Yeah. And it looks to be exactly what it purports to be, a look at human nature, human behavior, and it's just a big fat volume on that. So I'm looking forward to this book, and I hope it is as smooth a read, and that he's a good writer, because that makes up for a lot when it comes to subjects that are not my number one go-to subject when it comes to reading. This next book was a bit of an indulgence on my part, but I got it anyways, and it's got no title on the front, but if you look on the spine, it's Philosophy of Sexuality by Don Marita Jr. Don Marita Jr. And this is virtually an academically published book meant to be used in philosophy classes, or maybe specifically philosophy of sexuality classes. And I picked this book up mostly because I'm interested in anything that says the philosophy of. So like the philosophy of, and you just put anything in there, and then if it's cheap enough, I'll buy it and give it a go. This book is based off of sexuality, and it just goes through a lot of the normal controversial issues when it comes to sexuality, like what is sexuality, does sex have a purpose, feminism, sexual morality, adultery, homosexuality, abortion, gender equality, romantic love, marriage, family, just all, and it's 200 pages or so, and it's got a nice big bibliography, so I figured I couldn't go wrong with this. And another thing that appeals to me about these kinds of books is that brand new, this book would have cost me, $46? And instead I got it for probably around $4. So that kind of price disparity really interests me when I'm buying books, and it influences whether or not I want to buy it, because chances are I'll never find this used again, and if I regret not getting it, then I have to shell out $40 and I'm not about to do that, so might as well pick it up when the opportunity is there. And the same actually goes with this next book. It's The Origin, Then and Now by David Resnick, and the subtitle is An Interpretive Guide to the Origin of Species. And this book is very similar to, the reason why I picked this book up is very similar to why I picked up that other book. Like The Philosophy of Sexuality, this is an academic book. This is published by Princeton, and it's basically a study of biology and natural history using Darwin's Origin of Species as its guide. And it looks like it's like a complementary book to Darwin. I've not read Origin of Species myself, but I do own a copy, and I do want to read it someday. But I know already that what Darwin published in 1859 is very different from our, or at least different from our understanding of evolution and biology today. And so what this book does, from what I understand, is that it gives us an historical understanding of Darwin and the impact of his ideas during his time, and also then traces the biology of, or the understanding of evolution from Darwin's understanding to our present day understanding. So it's like it's updating our idea of Darwin, or at least if people only know evolution through reading Darwin's book, then you read this book as a way of understanding why Darwin's book was so influential and such an important milestone in the history of science, and why and how science has moved on from Darwin. And it's similar, and the reason why I say it's similar to the Philosophy of Sexuality is because if you did like this says The Origin, Then and Now, and an interpretive guide, I would have picked this up on almost any classic book or any very influential book where it's an interpretive guide or a study. So if it was like an interpretive guide to I don't know, Huckleberry Finn or something, or some philosophical work, I certainly would have picked that up as well. And because it's Darwin, it's probably best that it is Darwin, because if I read Darwin just by himself, my edition I don't think it has any notes or introduction to it, so I would just be relying purely on reading Darwin, and I wouldn't get any of the context or history that I would if I were to read this either before I read Darwin or after, because it also does work as an analysis of Darwin's book, because it has I think goes like chapter by chapter, and one part of it is a chapter by chapter look at Darwin's book and providing context and whatnot. So I think that'll be very helpful when I get to reading Darwin's Origin of Species. This next two books actually are both cultural history books, and the cultural history has got to be one of the parts of history that I love the most. And the first book here is Modern European Thought. It's called Continuity and Change in Ideas from 1600 to 1950, and it's by Franklin L. Balmer. And this is basically a textbook on the history of ideas. It was published in 1977, I believe. Yeah, 1977. We look at the front page here. And this book just takes it's one of the a cultural history of modern European ideas, and I think he takes an a certain approach. The theme is a sense of becoming rather than being, and if you know anything about philosophy, then you'll understand what that approach means and why it's important, or why that would make sense in a cultural history. Um, I'm still learning about those ideas. Maybe I'll go into that further when I talk about the books that I've been reading. But yeah, cultural history, especially European cultural history, is definitely one of my favorite subjects to think about and to read about. And this book fits right into that. I've never actually heard of this book before, but when I find it used for cheap, then I'm not going to let it go. And speaking of more cultural history, this book is a much more recent book. It's called Modernism by Peter Gay, and the subtitle is The Lure of Hearsay from Baudelaire to Beckett and Beyond. And it's a lot more of an attractive book, as you can see, and it's a lot more of a recent book. I believe this was published in 2008, something like that. Yeah, 2008. And it's just a big study. I think it's 500 pages, just over 500 pages, and it's a big look at modernism and the movement of modernism, mostly through the look of the arts, but also the influence of modernism and the whole idea of modernist thought, and how that was different from what came before. Because usually, what really interests me is the idea of postmodernity and how postmodernism, we're considered to live in a postmodern age, and the influence of postmodern philosophy. And maybe that sounds very niche and almost useless, because why would you need to study such obscure and intentionally obscure set of ideas? But I think those views have had a lot of influence on how our current culture today, whether or not you agree with them. And so my idea is wanting to study, in order to learn more about postmodernity, it's good to learn more about modernism and the movement that postmodernism was trying to move beyond, and how it became, or why it became identified as a movement beyond modernism or modernity, and even if that makes sense as a category. So this book will be a very interesting read on that sense, and it's right in my wheelhouse of the type of books that I'm looking for. I also want to get some more books by Peter Gay. I've looked him up on Amazon, and I found out he's got a 2-volume study of the Enlightenment, and so I want to see if maybe I'll get lucky and find those used at some point. So I'm at 18 minutes. I think I'm going to continue the streak of nonfiction, and then maybe I'll do another video for the books on literature. So continuing with nonfiction, the rest will almost purely be history, and a very particular kind of history. And the first book is Elizabeth I. This is by Anne Somerset, and it's exactly what it looks like. It's a biography of Queen Elizabeth I. It was published in 1991, I believe, and I took a English history course in university at one point, and during the period of Queen Elizabeth I, we had to do an essay, and my essay was on Queen Elizabeth I. And I remember taking out a big stack of biographies of her from the library, and this was one of them, though it didn't look like this. It was a naked hardcover, so it didn't look as nice or as attractive as this one did. And this one was very cheap as well, or else I don't think I would have got it. Only because Elizabeth I is one of the people I would actually be interested in reading a full biography of hers. I don't read a whole lot of biographies, mainly because I have to find the person interesting or the person has to be relevant on a certain topic that interests me. But I've been burned in the past by reading biographies of certain people, so I don't want to be burned again, because reading a biography this long if it's really dull, it can be such a drag. So I hope this one isn't a drag. I've heard good things about this biography, and Queen Elizabeth I and her time period does really interest me. So hopefully that'll be enough to carry me through, and enough intrigue. The next book here is a religious book. It's got no dust jacket, and I know that bothers some people, but it doesn't bother me, because if you get it for really cheap, then I'm not going to complain. And this one is what is it called? The Ransom of the Soul, and it's by Peter Brown. And if you're not aware of Peter Brown is a scholar of Christianity, of early Christianity and like early medieval religious history, late antiquity. He's written a ton of books on the subject, and I don't own any of them in physical copy. I own, I think, 2 of them as an ebook, or 3 of them as an ebook. This one is The Ransom of the Soul, and the subtitle here is Afterlife and Wealth in Early Western Christianity. And it doesn't sound like the most interesting subject, but I've heard a lot of good things about Peter Brown as a scholar and just as a readable historian. So even if you're not 100% interested in the subject, he's a good writer on the page, and you won't feel like you're just reading dry scholarship. And not only that, but he's also widely influential on this period of history. This is not the first book I would have gone out of my way to get of his as a physical copy, but when you see it cheap, you don't pass it down. Especially since I believe since it's an academic book, it would be quite expensive if I were to buy it brand new. But I love the fact that I found a Peter Brown book, and I believe this book has a weird approach, like based off of that subtitle, Afterlife and Wealth in Early Western Christianity. Somehow he sees a connection between how early Christians dealt with wealth and how that influenced their whole understanding of the afterlife. And somehow he makes a connection there, and I'm very curious to see what that connection is. And the next 6 books all are on one topic, and they're all history, but they're all on one historical topic, and you'll see it right away once I show you this next book. This is The Civilization of the Middle Ages by Norman Cantor. Civilization of the Middle Ages by Norman Cantor. This is this is an older book on medieval history, but as you see, it's a medieval history book, which is something that I'm very interested in. I have a whole shelf dedicated to medieval history books, and this was one of those books that is probably one of the most popular books on medieval history, especially, and it's one I didn't have, but it's, I believe it was published. It says on the front here, a completely revised and expanded edition of medieval history. So it looks like he published this as medieval history, like as a textbook called Medieval History first, in the 60s and 70s, but then in 1993, he virtually revamped most of this book, which is pretty big, actually. Yeah, it's just over 550 pages. So, and this one is actually published by a mainstream press, not an academic press, like you would expect from a textbook. But the textbook, I believe, was fairly well used in university, but then I guess in the 90s, he decided to completely revamp the book and got it published by a mainstream publisher. Yeah, so this is one of the books that I've been really looking forward to, and I believe it's just exactly what it says it is. It's a study of medieval civilization. And so yeah, I have a whole stack of medieval history books that are going to get more and more niche as we go through. This next book is The Making of the Middle Ages by, was it R.W. Southern? And very particular cover there. This is another book that I had on my wish list. That was a medieval history book I really did want. and this is published by an academic press, but I believe it is a fairly well used and influential book on the Middle Ages. It's not as but it's actually fairly old. I didn't even realize that until I bought it, but it was published in the 50s, and I don't believe it was ever updated. At least it doesn't say that it was updated. So it published in the late 50s, and yet it's still in print. You can buy a brand new copy of this for fairly reasonable price, even though it is from an academic press. So I don't know exactly why that is, but it's not even a history of the entire Middle Ages. It's just I think it's 200 or 300 years that he actually looks at about the Middle Ages. Yeah, a formative period of the medieval time period. So we'll see how that book is, and if it was worth it. But getting it for cheap, it's always worth it in my mind. Now we get into the very obscure stuff, and this is the life cycle in Western Europe from 1300 to 1500, and it's by Deborah Youngs, and I just love that cover. That's such a great cover. But I'm very interested in the idea of a life cycle just to begin with. Like in our modern period, the life cycle of when you reach certain points in your age, like when you reach, I don't know, when you're a teenager, to when you're in your 20s, to when you're in your 30s and 40s and 50s, and it just goes on, how your own idea of yourself and how you relate to the world, how that fundamentally shifts, and how you change as a person as you age, and whether or not that change is always for the good, or whether that change is maybe that change is not so good and it's not so positive. And yet we always have this conception of people never know that they age until maybe they reflect back on a much distant past of theirs. It's like you don't even know you age until you have something to compare it to, in which you were a different person, and you know that you were a different person, and that you've changed in that time period, and you've reflected on your life. But so getting a medieval history book where it talks about, it's a study of the life cycle in a certain section of medieval history. It's just late Middle Ages there with those time periods. And it's very obscure press too. It's Manchester University Press, which is from the UK, and yet somehow this book made it all the way across the Atlantic and got to a used bookstore. It's got some pencil underlining on there, so this has been read, but it's virtually new, and getting it for so cheap, like I can't deny that. Cannot turn that down. And yeah, we're just gonna get more and more obscure. The Ties That Bound. This is by Barbara A. Hannawalt, and that subtitle there is Peasant Families in Medieval England. So this book does not specify a country, it just goes Western Europe. This one is just a study of peasants in Europe. In England, my bad. And this is published by Oxford, and if you see the tab there, that was put in there by the previous owner. But yeah, this is another obscure medieval history book, but the peasants, the peasantry of the medieval ages is one of the areas of the medieval period that I'm very interested in. And it's because the whole idea of like the 90% or 80% of medieval Europe was people who were peasants, and yet most histories where you get of the medieval period are studies of the rulers, the aristocrats, and just the people who were not, the majority of the time period. I want to know how their lives were, and what were their lives like, and how does that differ from our lives today, and how did they see themselves, or did they conceive of themselves as an individual like we do today. um, and those questions always fascinate me about the period of history and how like this time period was what 500 plus years ago, which is a tiny drop in overall history as a species, but yet in our period that's like an eternity. I'm very different from a medieval peasant, and I would have been a medieval peasant if I was born 600 years ago. Chances are, and so these kinds of books are what really fascinate me, and I want to know what their lives were like, and just what did they think about, and what concerned them, and things like that. And this next book is also very niche. It's Medieval Monasticism, and this is by C.H. Lawrence, and this is the 3rd edition. This is another textbook, and it is just exactly what it purports to be. On the back here it says, it gives a subtitle on the back here actually: Forms of Religious Life in Western Europe in the Middle Ages. So yeah, just a study of monasticism. So I would say the 3 parts of the medieval era that interest me the most are the peasants. I would say the literature of the medieval period, so which would include chivalric knights, which don't so much interest me as an actual phenomenon. They interest me so much as a period of mythology that was very influential and important during that period of time. And then the third one would be like I think medieval thought and intellectual influence of the medieval era, which I'd like to learn more about, which will be shown in the next book here. But so and that intellectual thought of the medieval era largely depends on monks, medieval monks, because they were the ones that preserved manuscripts. They were the ones that well, if they could, they were the ones that were literate and wrote literature. Aristocrats did as well, but the monks were the preservers of knowledge, and I'm also interested about their way of life and the different sects of medieval monks. I believe this book was published in, well, the 3rd edition was published in 2001, but the other 2 editions, 1st and 2nd editions, were published in the 80s. And it's like 300 pages, and it goes through all different kinds of forms of monasticism in the medieval era, and getting a dedicated book on the subject instead of maybe, I don't know, a chapter in a general history, I think it will be fascinating to get that kind of detail, because religious history does interest me quite a lot as well. So it's not just the intellectual side of it, but and then this next book is also going to be one of the best finds of the entire haul, because this book is a book that I've had on my Amazon cart, or just sitting in my Amazon cart for a while, because it is relatively affordable for a book this niche, but to get it used for way cheaper was just a dream come true, really. And it's Medieval Foundations of the Western Intellectual Tradition, 400 to 1400, and it's by Marcia L. Kolish, and it's part of the Yale Intellectual History of the West series, as you see down there. And it's exactly what it purports to be. It's a study of the intellectual life of the Middle Ages, and how that has how it created the foundations of the Western intellectual tradition. So it's, as you see with the dates there, like 1,000 years of study in this size of a book. I mean, the book is relatively bigger, like it's bigger than a normal book, but it's not even 400 pages. It's just over 350. So, and what I mean by it's smaller, if I go this book here, you can see it's got quite a difference in size to the Queen Elizabeth book, but even then, this is just perfect, right up my alley. Intellectual history, it's medieval history, and it's also, from the title, it sounds like it's making an argument about the medieval foundations of our modern thought, which usually people like to discard the medieval period and its intellectual studies and concerns, and divorce them from any kind of influence that they might have today, because it's always seen as backwards, and it's usually the Renaissance and the Reformation that usually are seen as the germs of modern thought, and it's usually seen that as in a positive way, where we turned away from the Dark Ages or the medieval period, and turned to something that was a lot better. And maybe that is the case, but I haven't read enough on the subject to know exactly for sure, or to have any strong opinions on the subject. But all I know is that this will be a perfect add to my library, and it's been one that I've been wanting to buy for quite a while. I see that I'm at 36 minutes. I think that's quite enough for now. I will, well, thanks for seeing part 1 of my used book haul. The next part will mostly be literature. Actually, it'll be entirely be literature. So, and it won't be nearly as long, because it's only one small stack. So we'll see you in the next video.